Is the Super Mario Bros. Movie a cinematic masterpiece that sits among the greatest pieces that animation has to offer? Well, not exactly. But does that mean it's not worth watching? Absolutely not. Hey, how's it going everybody? I hope you're all good. This is Peter Gargan speaking, and the day is finally upon us. The Super Mario Bros. Movie, brought to us by a collaboration between Nintendo and Illumination, has arrived to cinemas, and it sparks the anticipation of not just long-time die-hard Mario fanboys like myself, but to the cinema-going scene as a whole. And after sitting down and giving it a watch, I have some thoughts that I wanted to share that I hope will get a discussion going. I'll try my best not to include spoilers throughout, but I'll save them towards the end of the video with a timestamp in the description, so you can go see it for yourself first before continuing. So, with that out of the way, let's not waste any more time and start with the positives. Firstly, the Super Mario Bros. Movie does a great job of immersing us into the settings of not just the Mushroom Kingdom, but also Mario and Luigi's hometown of Brooklyn and the jungles of Donkey Kong Country fame. It's nice to go back to exploring their lives before ending up in the Mushroom World, as we haven't really seen it being depicted all that much ever since the Super Mario Bros. Super Show. I feel like Nintendo and Illumination sheds this practically forgotten light into their origin story. I really appreciate how Foreman Spike from Wrecking Crew was portrayed as their former boss too, as it gives newfound context to an obscure, forgotten character that leaves room to expand their backstory as aspiring freelance plumbers trying to surpass him in business. Although this doesn't really get explored any further, something which I'll get into a bit later. It becomes immediately obvious that all sorts of references and Easter eggs are woven into the world building of the Mario universe, and this was something that I'll admit kept a thoughtful-sized grin on my face throughout the entire runtime, as it felt surreal to see this world I had grown up with during my childhood being adapted into a big screen production for all sorts of audiences beyond the pure fanbase to marvel at. Koji Kondo's iconic score also subtly creates the right kind of mood, and it was fun to listen out for various tunes from across the Mario series being applied to a cinematic context. I just remember constantly thinking, oh wow, that's this track from that game, several times, and was probably one of the most enjoyable aspects of the film to me. Leading up to the movie's launch, there were mixed responses towards the casting choices made for the characters, with Chris Pratt as the main man himself being particularly highlighted. I was also among those that were skeptical, and even when we heard him in the trailers for the first time, I remember thinking that it would take time to get adjusted to him, and ideally wished for Illumination and Nintendo to let Charles Martinet have the spotlight. After all, he's been the voice of Mario ever since the N64 era, so why not give him the Hollywood spotlight he deserves after years of his iconic and legendary performance? However, as more trailers have been released, and now that I've seen the full movie, it doesn't even bother me at all anymore. I just simply got used to his voice, and it was never enough to break the immersion for me anymore. I think Chris Pratt does a fine enough job to the point where he doesn't really cross my mind all that much, and Martinet's role of passing the torch is also poetically symbolised within the movie, but I won't spoil that. You'll just have to see what I mean when you get there. When it comes to the other performances that I genuinely enjoyed, it's safe to say that Jack Black's take on Bowser is the star, no pun intended, of the show. He manages to find that perfect balance between Bowser's typical goofiness, while also being an intimidating threat when he needs to be. And although some may feel mixed about Seth Rogen's Donkey Kong, I think he fits the whole dude bro archetype they went for with him rather well. It kind of reminded me of his performance as Alan the Alien from Invincible, even if that character isn't really the same thing. Then again, they both start out fighting the heroes, then progress to lending a helping hand later on, and they both have large hulking bodies, so maybe Seth's voice has a knack for fitting these kinds of characters well. And speaking of the dude bro persona, I quite like how DK enjoys showing off to the crowd, and he often clashes with Mario through back and forth banter, but they still ultimately have each other's backs in dire situations. It feels very true to how they started out as rivals in the arcade games, but eventually end up on good terms much like the various spin-off titles establish, so it's nice to have that dynamic of respect between them. I also want to give quick praise to the animation itself. Everything just looks nice and vibrant, and it all feels like such a faithful and cohesive depiction of the Mushroom World, full of fun little background details that bring it all to life. The action sequences are also really fun, especially with what the third trailer shows, with the Mario Kart inspired showdown on Rainbow Road being a particular highlight. It's a nice way of including elements of the beloved spin-off series in combination with the main series platformers, with a lot of Donkey Kong series love thrown in for good measure. Now, let's get into some aspects that I think hold it back from being a masterpiece in the lenses of holding it to the standards of a film in general. I don't think these outright ruin the experience as a whole, but I do think a hypothetical sequel's impact could be enhanced if these aspects were to be addressed. And for me to be able to explain what I mean, there will be spoilers here, so tread carefully or skip to the outro. Firstly, the story progression is incredibly fast-paced, both to its credit as well as its detriment. On one hand, it can be seen as a good thing that certain set pieces don't feel dragged out and lingered on, but at the same time, I can't help but feel like it doesn't leave room for certain narrative moments to breathe, or for characters to develop significantly. It's almost all over the place, and it feels like they try to cram in as many tributes to the Mario world as possible while squeezing it all into its rather short runtime of 92 minutes. By the end of it, I wish to see certain dynamics get explored in further detail, and I believe there is a lot of missed potential when it comes to room for development, especially when we see hints of it on a few occasions. While I have stated earlier that I appreciate the countless references as they enhance the world building and immersion, it was also a double-edged sword that resulted in a surface-level plot that fails to shed sufficient new perspectives on these beloved characters that I desired, and considered this aspect of the film a bit underwhelming. Peach's portrayal, for example, is already becoming an area of debate, and it's something I want to dedicate a bit of time to as I'm curious to see if anyone sees where I'm coming from. Now, Peach is generally depicted as this somewhat flawless badass that doesn't have many apparent weaknesses or shortcomings, which, if I'm going to be honest, makes a character feel a bit boring to invest in. It seems as if she doesn't really need Mario to even be there all that much to help save the Mushroom Kingdom, and can manage on her own. Sure, we briefly get to hear a glimpse of her backstory about being adopted by the Toads. We don't get an explanation as to why they eventually decided to crown this random baby they found as the ruler of the Mushroom Kingdom. Don't get me wrong, I think it's nice that this adaptation of Peach subverts the Mario series' long-running tradition of her being the damsel in distress, and understandably so, especially in today's climate of modern Hollywood likely taking an issue with the female lead being treated as such, which is a whole other can of worms, but I still think she could have greatly benefited as a character even more if we saw her show a more vulnerable side that gives us glimpses of introspection. Maybe she has her own relatable self-doubts of being a competent and worthy leader after the Toads put her in such a position of power to begin with. Personally, I would have loved to see something like that, as it would have been a believable character trait that gives her a compelling arc to follow, just as an example of something they could have explored. I don't think she completely falls into the likes of certain other characters from some recent Disney, Marvel and Star Wars movies that often get highlighted by fans and critics, because Peach is still shown to be rooting for Mario's success and supports him to get his confidence back rather than feeling the need to outdo his heroism at his expense, with the initial exceptions of pointing out that she cleared the obstacle course training that Mario struggled with several times on her first try, as well as the jokes about his height of course. But the games, particularly RPGs like Paper Mario, have also established that she is capable of being independent and resourceful, long before any of this even became a significant area of discussion regarding today's media, and I am totally behind seeing this badass portrayal of her because of those reasons. I just wish we saw more layers to it to make her feel just as compelling as she was in those games I mentioned. I'll even go as far to say that replacing her with Luigi to play the damsel in distress also makes logical and narrative sense, because it naturally complements Luigi's cowardly, scaredy cat personality that has also been cemented in the games, as well as the beginning of the movie itself. Therefore, I don't have a problem with this role reversal at all, because it still feels faithful to the source material and doesn't change things all that much in the grand scheme of things. I know I've brought attention to a rather controversial subject matter within the fictional media industry, which I usually try to stay away from within my videos, but I hope what I've said is a fair assessment of what I've observed, so please feel free to offer your thoughts on the matter, hopefully in a civil and open-minded way of course. With that being said, Peach isn't the only one guilty of this, so I don't want to target her specifically. Despite the praise I had for Donkey Kong earlier, he mentions at one point that he feels insecure because Cranky Kong doesn't respect him as a son, but we hardly see that dynamic coming into play. Its only purpose just seems to be a forced way for him to find common ground with Mario during the lowest point of their relationship, by having Mario compare Cranky to his own unsupportive father. But all we ever see Cranky do is just tell DK to take his fight with Mario seriously and stop being a show-off, and I ended up wanting to see more of that to flesh out DK's internal struggles, as it ended up feeling like a conflict that came out of nowhere with little to no build-up. This makes me wish that a dedicated Donkey Kong Country spin-off movie will be in the works that explores Cranky and DK's relationship in more depth, as again, it's a glimpse into missed potential. We have this whole Kong-populated civilization that doesn't get that much screen time, not to mention the cameos from other fan-favourite members of the Kong family, and I would totally be down to see more of it. Hopefully this preserving of information and lore is intentional and is being saved for something later on down the line. Also, just throwing it out there seems to be frequent uses of slow-motion gags during impactful action scenes that get repetitive rather quickly, and the use of the classic phrase "Mamma Mia" starts to overstay its welcome. Heck, during the screening I went to, I even heard this random kid on the other end of the row say, "How many times are they gonna say that?" So if you find this kind of self-referential humour on the cringeworthy side, you might want to brace yourself. Overall, the Super Mario Bros. Movie is a fun rollercoaster ride that will certainly entertain your kids and long-time hardcore fans that appreciate the references and attention to detail. But don't go in expecting a renowned masterpiece in storytelling or deep, fleshed-out expansions of your childhood gaming heroes, because you may end up disappointed on that front. I still think it's worth checking out regardless of what you're expecting, because there is still plenty of nostalgic fun to be had, and as someone who is still fresh from the excellent Puss in Boots: The Last Wish, not every animated movie needs to copy what that film has achieved for the medium. Sometimes it's okay to loosen up with that inner child and enjoy the ride, which is exactly what I chose to do, and I enjoyed the overall experience as a result, despite thinking of many things that could have made it even better. Anyway, that just about does it for this video. I hope you've enjoyed it. This is essentially the first movie review I've ever done on this channel, and since my content revolves around Nintendo anyway, this was the natural first choice for me to experiment with movie-related content. So let me know if you're interested in seeing me branch out beyond gaming. There's a few movies in mind that I'd like to cover if the demand is there, so feel free to offer your thoughts. Thanks so much for watching, and until next time, see you later.